You've probably heard of the Superjoy 3. It's a Famiclone that features tons of stolen NES games, but there's another console like it that has some notoriety, the PowerJoy. So what separates this from the Superjoy, and do they still make consoles today? Let's take a look. What's going on? It's Pojer coming at you with another video. You guys seem to like it when I talk about complete trash. The thing was actually sealed when I got it. I was afraid to open it, but I actually think it was resealed. I don't think it was actually like factory new sealed or anything. So here's my question to you. Have you ever had one of these PowerJoys before? If you have, let me know in the Discord server, discord.pojer.net. And if you're a regular watcher of my videos, check to see really quick if you're subscribed. If you're not, hit that subscribe button right there. Alright, let's dive into it. Let's see what this is all about.
PowerJoy is the dual-control video games machine that simply plugs into your TV. There are games for the whole family to enjoy, the ones we all remember, space games, platform games.
The Superjoy 3 is the most well-known bootleg game console. It's the perfect example of what many bootleg companies do. The console supposedly has 76,000 games built in, but really there's only 76. The game list is padded out to make it seem like there's more titles than there really are. Some games will start you on level 2 and then count that as a different game. Other titles will have very small graphical changes, and of course that counts as a new game too. Some titles are deceptively named like Toy Story or Tekken, when in reality they're completely different games. Despite all the downsides, the Superjoy 3 does have a great lineup of stolen games. You also get some exposure to Japanese exclusives. At the time, many people considered this to be a decent substitute for their original NES. The NES was notable for the pin connectors wearing down over time, so this was a great alternative to relive some of your favorite games. The only problem is that these consoles were so cheaply made, they most likely would break down before the original NESs did. I made a video talking about the Superjoy 3 and even discussed an arrest that was made because of it. Definitely check that out. The PowerJoy is similar to the Superjoy 3, but there's some very interesting differences that we'll go over. The box states that there's 84 games included. That's already a more reasonable number, unlike the 76,000 that the Superjoy 3 advertised. Maybe they're actually being honest about how many games are here. I do like the box design better, but there's no pictures of any of the games or any visuals whatsoever. The Superjoy 3 box at least had some generic stock pictures. The first player controller resembles the N64 one, just like the Superjoy 3, but it actually has a zapper built in. This is already a difference from the Superjoy, as that one has a separate gun. I tried playing a few games with this, and I'm not a fan of the controller. The D-pad feels cheap, and the buttons occasionally get stuck in place. If you think you're rusty at a game, it might actually be the controller that's the problem. The second player controller resembles a PlayStation 1. While it's not great, I actually do like the feel of this one better. It's too bad Player 2 gets this one and Player 1 is stuck with mediocrity. The manufacturers most likely modeled the controllers after the N64 and PlayStation because these were the newest consoles out at the time. But I think it would have been better if they made NES or Super Nintendo style controllers. Not only does the PowerJoy have a cartridge, but it's actually required to access the 84 games. Without it, there's only 10 games built in. This is very unlike the Superjoy, where all the games were built in. Some units did have a cartridge port, but there is no cartridge that came with them. There's also different PowerJoy cartridges that have a slightly altered lineup of games. Because the PowerJoy is just a Famicom inside of a controller, you can actually play real Famicom games with this unit. I don't recommend it though. Not only is the output quality not the best, but why would you want to play your Famicom games with this terrible controller? Like I hinted at, the console uses composite cords, which is acceptable for 2001 standards. From what I understand, the PowerJoy didn't have as much of a footprint as the Superjoy. The Superjoy was being sold at many kiosks, but the PowerJoy only appeared to be sold online. The official website was powerjoy.com, and they even offered to pay developers for games. Quote, "If you have written your own games and you have the source code, then we would like to hear from you. Please note, you must be the owner or writer of the game and have the source code available." That's pretty funny. Sometimes the PowerJoy would show up on QVC or infomercials. Anyway, let's take a deep dive and see what this is all about. Surprisingly, the unit actually does have 84 unique games, no repeats whatsoever. This is already a great improvement over the Superjoy. There are some name changes to some of the games, but none of them are super deceptive like Toy Story or Tekken from the Superjoy. Unlike that collection, which mostly went with more popular games, the PowerJoy actually has a good library of more obscure Famicom titles. Let's start off with 80 Days. It's a basic side-scroller. You have a projectile weapon, and you're able to collect items that give you certain abilities. One of them gives you super speed, and another one provides you invisibility. One item will let you jump higher, but for some reason, the flashing items will remove it. Why would you want that? The controls are okay, but inconsistent. Your character can only shoot left and right, but when he's on the boat, he can shoot up as well. But in the next stage, you're back to only shooting left and right. It's an alright game. This title was released in the US, but some major changes were made. Your character and the graphic style look the same, but otherwise, this looks like a completely different game. They must have really not liked the original. Hyper Olympics has a similar story. It's a track and field game where you must compete in 4 different events: 100-meter dash, long jump, hurdles, and javelin throw. Why only 4 events? Well, there's an interesting story behind it. Originally in Japan, Konami released Hyper Olympics and another game called Hyper Sports. Both games have 4 events each. When Konami released Track and Field in the US, they decided to combine both games into one, so this version has all 8 events. I'm not sure why the team at PowerJoy included the inferior version. It might be because Track and Field uses the CN-ROM mapper, which can sometimes cause issue in multi-carts. Unfortunately, some games are glitched on this collection. I tried Aladdin 3, but all the sprites keep teleporting to random places. It's literally impossible. I decided to troubleshoot by trying the PowerJoy cartridge on the Retro AVS. The game actually does work on it. I even tried playing it on the NES top loader and it worked on there too. Anyway, when playing Aladdin 3 on the Retro AVS, I didn't experience any issues. I also tried the game Pac-Land and it always freezes before the first stage. Once again, I tried it on the Retro AVS and it worked fine. Here's City Connection. You play as the red car and you must color in all the squares to beat the stage. You can collect projectiles that you can throw at the enemies. The developers were obviously desperate to include parallax scrolling, which is unfortunate because the frame rate is poor as a result. The controls are horrible. It's so difficult to color in the corner dots. No matter how hard I try, I always fall off the platform. You're not able to jump unless you have enough momentum. Sometimes you can't gain enough momentum because you don't have enough space. The graphics constantly blend in with the foreground, which is a terrible design. They seriously couldn't pick a better color scheme? This is a very lousy game. Anyway, the PowerJoy version of this game does have some graphical glitches. On stage 3, the background is a jumbled mess. I tried it on the Retro AVS and surprisingly it's glitched on that too. Let's try B-Wings, or Battle Wings. It's a top-down shooter. You start off on the menu screen where you can pick a weapon. You have a ton to choose from, and some of them are really cool. Throughout the game, there's various barriers you have to destroy. Sometimes if you're too slow, you might get trapped in a narrow passageway. When you get hit, you lose your weapon, and if you get hit again, you lose. It's always recommended to grab a weapon if you don't have one, even if it's bad, because you do get that extra hit point. Some weapons are advantageous for certain points of the level, like being able to shoot below, for example. Sometimes you can find a secret special weapon that's not available on the menu screen. The bosses are just a hodgepodge of recycled graphics from the stages, although sometimes you do fight bugs and reptiles. This is a surprisingly good game, but I have some minor nitpicks. If you have one of the special weapons, sometimes you're forced to discard it and pick one of the regular weapons. The game is also repetitive, and there's not a lot of graphical variety. For 1986 standards though, this is a great game. The title also had some graphical glitches on the PowerJoy, but when playing on the Retro AVS, it worked completely fine. I wanted to talk about the menu for a second because it's not great. You can advance forward through the pages by pressing select, but you can't move back. This is weird because in the other PowerJoy cartridge that I have, you can easily navigate through the pages by pressing left or right. I assume this is a newer version and the company learned from their mistakes. Penguin Wars is a very unique game. It's a game of dodgeball where you must throw all the balls to the other side. If there's no dodgeballs remaining on your side, you win. The easiest way to win is by hitting your opponent with a dodgeball because it will stun them. That way, you can easily clean up your side and win the round. The controls are weird. For some reason, you can only shoot diagonally after the timer reaches a certain point. I had never heard of this title before PowerJoy, and this is a good example of how sometimes bootlegs can be good. For whatever reason, the title of this game on the menu is ASCII, which is the publisher. I don't know why they did that. Here's Door. It's a single-screen platformer where you must trap all the enemies inside of doors. The more enemies you line up at once, the more points you get. You're able to jump, which lets you escape from danger. Be careful though, because some enemies will jump with you. This game is a good example of why I don't like the D-pad on the Power Joy. Whenever I climbed a ladder, my character kept veering off to the right and I would die. This also kept happening when I was playing Wrecking Crew. For some reason, the D-pad is not good with up movements. Anyway, the level design is creative at some points. In one level, you must manipulate the enemy's jumping pattern to get him to the door. My only complaint is how slow this game is and how poor the framerate is. That's pretty pathetic considering the game doesn't even scroll. But still, it's a fun game. I mainly wanted to focus on the more obscure Famicom games, but the collection does have more well-known titles. A bunch of Namco's games are on here like Dig Dug and Mappy. Surprisingly though, there's no Pac-Man. Some of Nintendo's titles made the cut as well. Super Mario Bros. Is on this collection in the form of a ROM hack. The graphics are slightly altered, but the levels are exactly the same. Devil World is a Pac-Man style game that features auto-scrolling. The game came out in Japan and Europe, but was never released in the US because of Nintendo of America's strict policy on religious icons. In Wrecking Crew, you must demolish the breakable blocks in order to win. My favorite feature is the ability to make your own levels. I love when developers throw this in. Adventure Island, which is called Adis Land for some reason, is a decent platformer where you must guide Master Higgins to the end without running out of health. Radius is a fun shooter where you can collect weapon upgrades. I'm actually surprised that the Power Joy team was able to fit this one on here. I do think the Power Joy is better than the Super Joy. There's more games, they weren't as deceptive, and I like the idea of having the light gun built in. I think they picked a great lineup of games for this collection. If you were looking for a high number of NES games or a replacement for your dead console, this might have been a viable option back in the early 2000s. But even then, it was still not a great solution. Some of the games had glitchy artifacts. These units were also known for breaking. The reason I have 2 cartridges is because my first Power Joy from when I was a kid broke. My aunt had a Power Joy as well, and she had to wrap electrical tape all over hers to keep it in one place. My cousin had one, but the second controller stopped working. Obviously, the Power Joy was a pretty hot item in my family, but we all have the same thing in common. They didn't work for long. These units were very poorly made and not a good long-term or even short-term option for playing NES games. Unless you're a collector that must have one of these, there's plenty of other ways of playing NES games today, whether it's emulation, FPGA consoles, or picking up the original hardware off eBay. Not much is known about what happened to the Power Joy. The domain powerjoy.com expired and is currently available for registration. That's pretty funny. I checked the Wayback Machine and the site has not existed since 2005. I think it's safe to say that they're no longer continuing operations. Hey, I just wanted to thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, hit that like button. If you enjoy this type of content, hit the subscribe button for more content. Both of these things really help the channel grow. If you have anything to share, feel free to leave a comment. I read every single comment on this channel, and I'm pretty good at replying back. Anyway, have a good one.